Ukraine is smashing the logistics of Russian Marines in the Kursk region and counterattacking in Donbas. Russia is publicly disputing its responsibility for the downed Boeing in the international court. Putin is preparing a new front for an offensive against Europe from Kaliningrad. The bloody executioner of Bucha is now a major general, and the Russian Orthodox Church and the State Duma are blessing men kissing each other. A sensation about Putin, sex, a scandal with an underage mistress. Hello, my name is Yulia Kukan, and right now here are the main stories. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose each other on YouTube. Ukraine's defense forces have launched a counteroffensive in the Donetsk direction.
We are currently carrying out an important task.
One of our counteroffensive operations right now. Guys, well done. In the Donetsk direction, near Pokrovsk and Dobropilya, there are fierce battles, but we have managed to inflict significant losses on the Russians. In fact, our forces are depriving the occupiers of the ability to carry out a full-scale offensive operation, which they had planned to be long and were counting on. First Sumy region now here. Ukrainian units are achieving results for Ukraine.
We're keeping our fingers crossed for our Cossacks. They're making titanic efforts in this war. Daibuk and Dodonetsk will get there soon. And
the center of Kupiansk.
But Kupiansk, in fact, however,
is unbreakable.
by the way, Zelensky recorded his address from Donbas where he met with soldiers participating in the Dobropilya counteroffensive operation.
I wish you good health, esteemed warriors. First of all, I want to thank you for defending our state. I know your actions. The commander-in-chief has reported to me repeatedly. I have seen your comrades myself, and I want to thank you for your outstanding resilience. You truly are an example for the armed forces of Ukraine, for all the warriors of our defense forces.
Meanwhile, in the Kursk region, the Special Operations Forces struck at the Russians' logistics hub. It is known that the Special Operations Forces carried out a strike on the logistics hub of the 810th Separate Marine Brigade of Russia and destroyed a storage base for materiel, ammunition depots, and a concealed location where the 810th Brigade's weapons and equipment were kept. And in the Kherson region, Gore fighters landed at night on the Tendrovskaya Spit and set a trap for the occupiers. Fighters from the Viking Naval Operations Center set up a minefield on the Spit. It is known that a Russian DT-10 Vityaz multi-purpose tractor, which the occupiers used to deliver personnel, weapons, and provisions to enemy positions, fell into the Special Forces trap. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They hold the front and stand against a huge horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge everyone to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And if you can't do that, write them words of support in the comments. I know they're watching us. Well, as for Russia, everything is as usual. They've hit a new low yet again. Putin has promoted the Bucha executioner Baskov. Just recently, a volunteer from the international intelligence community informed Napalm, while monitoring regional news from Russia's Khabarovsk Krai, noticed an important new mention of an event attended by the high-ranking war criminal, the Bucha executioner Azadbek Amurbekov. And he was already there with his new rank.
This time he attended the unveiling of a monument to female tank crew members and personally inaugurated it in Sanastasevka. And while just 6 months ago Amurbekov was referred to in the media as a guards colonel, this time he was introduced as a major general.
Inform Napalm published a photo in which Amurbekov appeared as a major general as early as the beginning of September. In the shot, he is standing with a slight smirk behind a veteran of the war with Japan. But that's not all. Volunteers report that in addition to his orders and medals, the major general also traveled to China for an experience exchange. However, what kind of experience he was sharing with his colleagues remains an open question. Let me remind you, the war criminal Amurbekov has been subjected to personal international sanctions by the UK, Switzerland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, the US, and EU countries. But in Russia, he is considered a hero and has earned a promotion. And in 2022, Putin awarded the 64th Brigade the honorary title of Guards for exemplary actions during the war against Ukraine. Well, what can I say? With each passing year, the face of this newly minted general grows broader, and he is still awaiting punishment for all his atrocities on Ukrainian territory. And what do you think about such a promotion? Write your thoughts, don't hold back in the comments. Russia has built a new launch site for Shahed drones in the Bryansk region, just 35 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, so that UAVs can reach their targets even faster. Everything indicates that Putin has no intention of ending the war. And that means Ukraine and its partners will have to find $120 billion to successfully confront their common enemy, the aggressor, in 2026. Meanwhile, Trump is putting forward conditions for Europe that are hardly feasible from the start, so he can wash his hands of the matter and avoid strengthening sanctions against his friend Putin. We've gathered the most important information about the prospects for ending the war.
At any cost, not to fall out with Vladimir. Washington has come up with a new move to avoid putting pressure on Moscow while not appearing overtly pro-Russian. To do this, Trump is setting Europe deliberately unachievable conditions. This is reported by the Wall Street Journal.
Listen, Europe, they're my friends, but they're not buying oil from Russia, so you can't expect us to be the only ones, who are completely absorbed by this. But Europe is buying oil from Russia, and I don't want them to buy oil. And the sanctions they're imposing aren't tough enough. And I'm ready to impose sanctions, but they'll have to toughen their own sanctions to match what I'm doing. They're buying a lot of oil from Russia. That's not right, as
Analysts from the publication point out, the White House administration had already calculated in advance that EU countries would not be able or willing to meet Trump's demands. And since he's demanding that all EU countries stop buying oil from Russia, their failure to comply gives him an excuse to avoid increasing economic pressure on the Russian Federation.
Naturally, this is mockery. Of course, this is just a way and an attempt to make excuses and avoid imposing any sanctions against his beloved Vladimir, while shifting the blame onto someone else, saying, "It's not my fault, it's not my responsibility, it's Europe." No, they refuse.
At the same time, paradoxically, the two largest consumers of Russian oil in the EU remain Hungary and Slovakia, whose leaders have especially friendly relations with Trump, and over whom he has his own levers of influence. Analysts explain that, for them, there are no problems switching to Western logistics for oil products and gas. At the same time, trade with Russia can no longer be justified by short-term obligations or non-economic benefits.
In June of 2025, the significant long-term contracts between the nation of Hungary and the Russian Federation officially came to an end. Hungary had always consistently referred to the undeniable fact that breaking these significant contracts could potentially lead to very large and substantial financial penalties. So, the contracts have indeed ended, but Hungary is still actively buying Russian oil on the global spot market. And by the way, it's not exactly cheap at all, which presents a considerable economic challenge. This has become increasingly evident in how much petroleum products actually cost for the end consumers in various different European countries, and for both Hungary and Slovakia, this particular price turned out to be the absolute highest.
So, besides gas from Russia, these countries are getting something else, analysts add, and it's likely that we're talking about financial benefits not for the country but for certain politicians. At the same time, in addition to Trump's demands for Europe to stop trading with Moscow, there are also calls to impose sanctions, particularly against China, which sounds especially hypocritical given the absence of such restrictions from the US itself.
He is also being hypocritical regarding the sanctions that, in his opinion, Europe should impose on that very same China. He suggests that Europe should introduce 100% tariffs. At the same time, Trump himself is hesitant to impose additional sanctions on China. He wants European countries to do it for him.
Europe, on the other hand, appeals to the opposite mechanism, saying, let the US take the lead and we'll join in, which is in fact how it has always been. In turn, Ukraine responded to this game of broken telephone quite logically. If both sides are theoretically ready to impose sanctions, then let the one that doesn't need to consult with partners and can formalize it legally faster be the first to start.
I believe that America already has enough sanctions to deal a blow to the Russian economy. And Donald Trump has enough power for Putin to be afraid of him. That's exactly how it is. In this case, Europe should act in alliance with the United States of America. But we need to understand that we can't wait for all European countries to cut off this or that contact with Russia, whether it's oil or gas. He's right about that. Europe needs to stop all purchases of energy resources from Russia. But we shouldn't wait. I don't agree with that. I believe that America is strong enough to stop Putin.
Having once again seen the reaction of the US, it seems that in the Russian Federation they've become even bolder, according to the Institute for the Study of War. Analysts, after listening to Lavrov's recent speech, concluded that the Kremlin is currently not even considering the topic of negotiations. Thus, the head of the foreign ministry stated that territorial exchanges will not stop the war, nor will the restoration of trade with the West, or, conversely, the tightening of sanctions.
Increasing sanctions pressure, which in any case makes no sense and has no decisive impact on the Russian economy.
However, that's just the official line. In reality, though, the prospect of sanctions does frighten the Russian elite, which is clearly evident in the speeches of propagandists who have decided to fight this new threat using their old playbooks.
In this,
The Kremlin's anti-negotiation policies also include the recent dismissal of Putin's ally, Dmitry Kozak. He made the mistake of telling the bunker dweller that it was time to stop shooting and sit down at the negotiating table, but contradicting the bunker dweller is not something that's done in the Russian Federation. Especially at a time when he is convinced that Washington is playing into his hands and is essentially giving him carte blanche for a military solution to the issue.
The only thing Trump can give him at this point is time. And Trump gives him another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks. And now he's finally just given up and given him 2 years until January 1st, 2028. Volodya, will that be enough for your goals? If at the same time we try to somehow gently interfere with what you're doing, like punishing the people who trade with you, but you still have China anyway.
At the same time, it's worth noting that European officials are not lacking in patience or political strategy. Slowly but surely, they are repeatedly persuading Trump to side with the good guys. The decision to sell weapons to Europe for Ukraine is a vivid confirmation of this. And according to experts, if there is enough of this weaponry, it will soon be Moscow that will be asking for negotiations.
Russia is cynically disputing responsibility for the downed Boeing. The Kremlin rejects the decision of the International Civil Aviation Organization's Council, which several months ago found Moscow guilty of downing the Boeing MH17 in July 2014. The appeal is mentioned in a press release from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Russian Foreign Ministry accuses the Council of tailoring the decision's arguments to fit a predetermined conclusion, copying the position of one side in the dispute while completely rejecting or distorting the arguments of the other side. According to the Kremlin, the decision was politically motivated.
The arguments of the decision were tailored to fit a prearranged conclusion, copying the position of one side in the dispute while the arguments of the other side were completely dismissed or distorted. Contrary to the requirements of the UN Security Council resolution, the ICAO Council did not consider it necessary to conduct a full, thorough, and independent international investigation into the circumstances of the disaster. Instead, it accepted at face value the highly questionable results of the technical and criminal investigations, which were conducted under the auspices of an interested party, the Netherlands, and relied on manipulated facts provided mainly by another interested party, Ukraine. Russia will continue to seek the truth in accordance with its obligations under the UN Charter and applicable norms of international law.
Now, the International Court of Justice of the UN must take up the case. Let me remind you, on July 17, 2014, a Malaysia Airlines plane flying a passenger route from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur was shot down over the Donetsk region. There were 298 people on board, and all of them died. The investigation determined that the missile was launched from a Russian Buk surface-to-air missile system and that Russia is responsible for the tragedy. The case of the plane crash was considered by a Dutch court. In 2025, the European Court of Human Rights and the International Civil Aviation Organization found Russia guilty of shooting down the Boeing MH17 in July 2014. It's impossible not to recall that in 2015, that same Russia refused to recognize international law and now it is running to court itself to challenge its own crime. You have to admit, step by step, Russia keeps finding new lows.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Putin is preparing a new front. The city of Kaliningrad is becoming a real threat to NATO. It is from there that the Kremlin could launch a new war against the alliance. Why is Kaliningrad so dangerous for Europeans? We'll explain next.
The starting point. Russia's war with NATO begins with the Kaliningrad region.
Kaliningrad is undoubtedly one of the most important regions of Russia, our outpost in the west.
The Kremlin is preparing new provocations. The Russian army has moved Iskander missiles to NATO's borders. The alliance has declared its readiness to strike Kaliningrad instantly. The Kaliningrad region is the westernmost region of the Russian Federation and is an exclave, completely separated from the main territory of Russia by other countries. The Russians have effectively turned the Kaliningrad region into a military base. The main formations include ground forces, aviation, and the largest naval base of the Baltic Fleet.
The Russian exclave has always been militarized. It is located, as it were, in the heart of NATO territory, between Poland, Lithuania, and the Baltic Sea. The presence of Belarus nearby, with the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons and potentially missile systems in the future, indicates that Kaliningrad is becoming, a special militarized zone that creates risks for the North Atlantic Alliance.
Kaliningrad very often becomes the center of Russian saber-rattling. In this way, Putin is testing the waters of NATO's capabilities. For example, during the joint Zapad 2025 exercises with Belarus, the military practiced combat operations on the territory of the Kaliningrad region, after which the Kremlin deployed Iskander missiles there, posing a threat to 6 alliance countries.
Undoubtedly, this is about probing NATO's reaction, testing its capabilities, and checking its response protocols. Of course, these mirror actions, which are essentially reciprocal measures taken in response to another's actions, are consistently and meticulously under the intense scrutiny and careful observation of the highly experienced and strategic general staffs of the opposing countries.
For Russia, confrontation with the North Atlantic Alliance is seen, and this should be understood, as the next stage in maintaining power by the current leadership, that is, the Putin regime. The current Putin regime absolutely cannot exist in conditions of genuine peace. It simply cannot exist in conditions of a true truce. As of right now, it can only exist in a perpetual state of ongoing war.
According to the expert, all the provocations by the Russian authorities in the Kaliningrad region currently amount to nothing.
From a military standpoint, Kaliningrad is absolutely not a knife in the back. It's a vulnerable location. Russia will have to save Kaliningrad instead of Kaliningrad, or rather the Kaliningrad region, serving as some kind of springboard for a large-scale operation. Most of the military units in the Kaliningrad region are empty now since their personnel have been sent to Ukraine. Overall, the Kaliningrad region is the Achilles heel of Europe, specifically for the Russian Federation.
Back in July, NATO allies announced the creation of a plan to neutralize the Kaliningrad region, which is intended to counter threats from Russia and ensure global deterrence.
What the military, technical, and defense industrial complexes of NATO countries are doing today, to put it mildly, does not correspond to the current challenges. That's why the question arises about whether NATO countries are ready to deploy, for example, their 50 Leopard 2 tanks against 2,000 or 3,000 Russian drones per day. Right now in Ukraine, Russia is using on average about 1,500 drones, FPV drones per day. Is NATO ready for this? No.
What Putin needs now is to demonstrate NATO's inability to handle such provocative situations. Russia is interested in there being disagreements within the alliance. It needs division and the undermining of unity in order to create a serious crisis within NATO.
Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of our viewers are from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful for your support and proud to have such reasonable viewers. Write in the comments under this episode which country you're watching us from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. And for now, we continue. Now comes the most interesting part. Denmark will purchase missiles capable of striking targets deep inside Russia in order to protect itself from a possible threat. As reported by Reuters, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen stated that there is no doubt Russia will pose a threat to Europe and Denmark for many years to come. You can find all the details in our report.
Denmark will purchase long-range missiles and drones due to the threat from Russia. This was announced by the country's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. Danish Defense Minister Troels Lund Poulsen noted that with these new resources, the armed forces will be able to actively counter threats far from the country. According to Poulsen, the experience of the war in Ukraine has shown that it is important not only to build a layered air defense system, but also to have the means to strike targets on enemy territory, including missile launchers.
Denmark on its own is unlikely to be able to defend itself against Russia. That is why Denmark is one of the key members of the North Atlantic Alliance, the so-called NATO bloc. Over the past 30 years, the European members of NATO have, seriously disarmed. You know, in Europe, there was a prevailing belief in protection from the United States. With the arrival of Trump in the White House, it turned out that this wasn't quite the case.
According to the Commander-in-Chief of the Danish Army, General Michael Weigers Gilgaard, high-precision long-range weapons will allow the military to counter threats before they reach their territory.
And the Danes, among others, are interested in acquiring and deploying missile systems with a range of more than 600 kilometers, that is, exceeding the range of short-range tactical missiles.
Russia's ambassador to Copenhagen, Vladimir Barbin, responded to Denmark's statement immediately. According to him, no one, anywhere, at any time in the world has ever even thought of publicly threatening a nuclear power. And now Russia must proceed from the assumption that Denmark is not only considering the possibility of a direct military confrontation with it, but is also preparing for such a scenario.
Russia is demonstrating, and in fact, their goal was to demonstrate the lack of unity within NATO, the North Atlantic Alliance, to sow discord among the member states of the alliance, to break apart and destroy the European security system. They are indeed succeeding at this endeavor. They are achieving this success through rather simple means at first glance, employing tactics that appear straightforward. However, proving Russia's direct and undeniable guilt in these matters is exceptionally difficult, a challenge that persists only if one deliberately chooses not to acknowledge or confront the overwhelming evidence that is readily available and clearly points to their involvement. Nevertheless, many Europeans are already clearly seeing the aggressive and hostile nature of the Russian Federation, and while they have not yet fully accepted that a potential war with Russia, if not entirely inevitable, is at least quite genuinely possible, and in the very near future at that particular moment.
Prime Minister Frederiksen responded to the statement by the Russian ambassador by saying that it would not affect Denmark's decision in any way and that her country would not allow Russia to intimidate them. The Australian government is lowering the price cap on Russian oil to $47.60 and is imposing targeted sanctions on another 95 vessels of Russia's shadow fleet. This was stated in a message from the Australian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The agency is confident that their decision will lead to a decrease in the market value of Russian oil and deprive Russia's war economy of revenue. Australia is taking these measures together with the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and Japan, and is also maintaining a complete ban on the import of oil and petroleum products from Russia. In addition, the country is imposing targeted sanctions against another 95 vessels of the Russian shadow fleet. As a result, the Australian government has already imposed sanctions on more than 150 vessels since June 2025. For his part, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, thanked the Australian government for their resolute support of our country and for upholding international law.
I am grateful to the Australian government for their resolute support of Ukraine and for upholding international law. By lowering the price cap on Russian oil and imposing targeted sanctions against 95 vessels of the Shadow Fleet, Australia is helping to limit Russia's ability to finance its war and undermine global peace. We value our strong partnership with Australia and continue to stand together for our shared values.
Additionally, Bloomberg reports that the European Union is considering an accelerated phase-out of Russian liquefied gas following Trump's call to abandon Russian oil. According to Bloomberg, the European Commission is considering including a provision in the 19th package of sanctions against Russia to end imports of all Russian LNG earlier than the previously planned deadline of the end of 2027. In addition, the European Commission is considering the possibility of accelerating the cessation of imports of liquefied gas from Russia by adjusting the REPowerEU plan, which is aimed at ending dependence on Russian energy resources, according to the publication. In recent weeks, calls to stop purchasing Russian oil and gas have been increasingly voiced by U.S. President Donald Trump and his administration as a prerequisite for strengthening sanctions pressure on Russia. But I definitely like this kind of news. I hope that as time goes on, things will only get tougher for Russia. North Korea, which is friendly to Moscow, has just debuted its Kumsun series strike drones. Their dimensions are comparable to a small passenger airliner. This was reported by the North Korean state agency KCNA. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un personally oversaw the tests and was satisfied with the results. The development was carried out by institutes and factories of the Unmanned Aeronautical Technology Complex. The specific technical characteristics of the new drones are still being kept secret. Kim Jong-un stated that the development of artificial intelligence and the operational capabilities of drones should become one of the main priorities in the process of modernizing the armed forces. In addition, Kim ordered the urgent implementation of the latest technologies and the expansion of mass production capacities. And now, attention, the main question: how soon will North Korea's loyal friend, Russia, want to have such drones in its arsenal? Share your thoughts in the comments. Nikolai Baskov is in a panic. He and his mother are being threatened and cursed. And this has already happened not just once, but thousands of times. The bleating pro-organ grinder Z-Patriot somehow managed to count as many as 280,000 such curses and blames his former colleagues in the industry for them. Well, let's have some fun.
The troubadour of the Russian Empire, Nikolai Baskov, started whining. Obviously, we've reached a time when it's not enough to just shout yourself hoarse for Mother Russia and Putin to prove your loyalty to the dictator and his agenda.
My profound pride, my unwavering strength, you, Russia, are truly the one and only nation like this, uniquely exceptional and eternally cherished.
Now Baskov is playing the victim, of course, because of his patriotic stance. In 2025, Kolya started whining at one of the press conferences, saying that Ukrainians under the bombs didn't appreciate first Putin's deadly gifts and then his support for this war. The unfortunate Baskov was attacked on the internet. The pro-Putin crooner even counted the angry comments.
I was faced with a huge number of threats. They harassed my mother. There were about 280,000 threats, curses, and everything else after my colleagues, friends, and artists we worked with from Ukraine started posting the phone numbers of artists and directors, and all of that came crashing down on us. You see, we too are like fighters on an invisible front. In the very first year, we were absolutely bombarded with an enormous and overwhelming number of truly unpleasant text messages, posts, comments, and even direct threats, all of which continued non-stop, relentlessly.
Putinist Baskov was one of the first to join the ranks of the Kremlin's cultural army. He explained his position by saying that, having been raised in a military family in numerous garrisons, he absorbed a love for Russia and its expansionist wars with his mother's milk. The Golden Voice and People's Artist was earning his titles not only at all government concerts, but also in hospitals. He traveled with concerts to the military killers and financed the war out of his own pocket. In December 2022, Russian media published a sensation. Baskov, in support of the so-called SVO fighters, sent 1 million rubles and later even promised to pay $1 million to anyone who would destroy a German Leopard tank supplied to Ukraine's defense forces.
All of this is right before my eyes. Many people don't see this, but in reality, our soldiers are great heroes. They are people who are doing everything they can right now, you understand? So that today we can walk peacefully on our streets, go to restaurants, go to cafes and enjoy life. Many people today don't understand we need to become a great united force and there's no other way. Otherwise we really will be destroyed, we'll be erased like with an eraser. And today, yes, I want to say it's not easy for our president either. He has taken on such a responsibility to stand up to the world. Can you imagine? For the sake of his nation. But this is a forced situation, my friends. It's either us or them.
At the same time, to relieve stress, the sponsor of the war and cultural propagandist doesn't go to the sea in occupied Bryansk or even Crimea, but instead travels to a country that is one of the oldest NATO members and has the alliance's second-largest army, Turkey. However, even there, the songs and dances of the Russian supporters sometimes encounter condemnation from Ukrainians who were forced to flee the war.
We are happy you in Turkey.
Likewise, likewise.
I wanted to say, I'm from Ukraine, and Russia is bombing Ukraine right now. You know, every day, while you're here having fun. How can you have fun like this?
I'm relaxing, not having fun.
All right. Glory to Ukraine.
In April of this year, Baskov complained that Turkey, Africa, Dubai, and the Maldives are the only places outside of Russia where he can stay peacefully. Obviously, the darker the clouds gather over his homeland, the more theatrically its jester will perform.
This is real shock content, Russian style. Listen closely. The Russian Orthodox Church and the State Duma have blessed men kissing each other. And now let's get into the details. A cleric from the Ivanovo-Voznesensk diocese of the Russian Orthodox Church, Hieromonk Makary, told the publication Abzats that Orthodoxy does not forbid believers of the same sex from kissing each other on the lips, cheeks, or shoulders if such greetings are allowed by tradition.
Oh my goodness gracious!
According to him, the Holy Scripture does not say that men can only kiss women, and that men with men or women with women should not kiss.
Greet one another with a holy kiss. If the local customs of the time and place allow for such greetings, including the kisses mentioned by the Apostle Paul, then this is entirely permissible.
This is truly a wonderful and beautiful dream come true, and every single thing that I do is out of loving you with all of my heart and soul.
Following him, the male kisses were supported by Vitaly Milonov, a deputy of the State Duma of the aggressor country Russia.
This, by and large, is a kind of traditional greeting. It's our Russian tradition. There's not a drop of vulgarity or indecency in it. There is absolutely no hidden meaning or hint of eroticism in this tradition.
Well, this is a victory. And who knows, maybe soon even LGBT legalization isn't far off. Oh, Russia. Oh, such a generous soul. You won't believe it, but it's a fact. During Putin's premiership in 2010 to 2011, he had an underage mistress. This was reported by Bild, citing the authors of the book The Tsar in Person.
The authors of The Tsar in Person told the story of a girl named Alisa Karcheva from the city of Korolev, who in 2010 took part in a photo shoot for an erotic calendar dedicated to Putin's birthday.
It is known that along with the calendar, Putin received the contact information of the models. And again, as the authors of the book write, the Russian dictator specifically wanted to meet Karcheva. As a result, their relationship lasted for about a year. At that time, the girl was only 17.
Investigators claim that Karcheva regularly visited the residence of the then head of government. Later, she enrolled in a university and a few years later became the owner of an expensive apartment in Moscow, which was registered to her through businessman Grigory Baevsky, who is connected to oligarch Arkady Rotenberg.
Currently, according to Bild, Karcheva is involved in the beauty business, promoting a startup that manufactures tanning beds. And here, of course, I could pretend to be surprised. But no, I'm not surprised at all. What about you? Write in the comments. What do you think of our news? Let us know we should change to become better. We will definitely take it into account. In the meantime, give this video a like to support what we do, and be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss future episodes. See you soon.